It was one of those late summer evenings where the air still held onto the day's heat, but the sky had softened into that quiet blue just before nightfall. Streetlights flickered on one by one, and neighbors were out walking dogs or rolling trash bins to the curb. Nothing unusual, nothing tense. Just another ordinary Saturday in a quiet American suburb. That's when the black SUV slowed near a crosswalk, its brake lights glowing red for a beat too long, just enough to catch the attention of a patrol car idling 2 blocks down. The officer behind the wheel, a man with a stiff posture and a habit of squinting even in low light, watched the vehicle. He ran the plates out of routine. Nothing came back. Still, something about the way it paused made him uneasy. Or maybe it was just the way the driver sat, upright, calm, in control. Sometimes calmness reads as defiance to those who expect nervousness. He flipped on his lights. The SUV pulled over smoothly without hesitation. The driver's window rolled down slowly, revealing a woman in her early 50s wearing a simple blouse and a look of mild surprise. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, visible, relaxed, respectful. She didn't reach for anything. She didn't speak first. She just waited. "License and registration," the officer said, not meeting her eyes. She handed them over without a word. Her military ID was clipped to her license, standard practice for active duty personnel, even off-duty. The officer glanced at it, then back at her, his brow furrowing. "This real?" he asked, voice edged with doubt. "Yes, sir," she replied, calm as ever. He snorted softly. "Right, and I'm the chief of staff." He tapped the ID against his palm like it was a joke. "You expect me to believe a woman like you is a general?" She didn't flinch. "I don't expect anything, officer. I'm just complying with your request." That seemed to irritate him more. Maybe it was the tone, steady, unshaken. Maybe it was the fact that she didn't lower her eyes or shrink her presence. Or maybe it was something deeper. Something he wouldn't admit even to himself. Whatever it was, his stance shifted. His hand drifted toward his radio. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. "Am I under arrest?" she asked. "Just step out." She did. Slowly. Deliberately. She kept her movements clear and open, the way she'd been trained. Decades of discipline in high-stakes environments kicking in without thought. She stood by the door, hands at her sides, as he circled her like she might explode. "You matching the description of someone we're looking for," he said, though no description had been given, and no bolo alert was active. "I haven't done anything wrong," she said gently. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Neighbors had started to notice. A woman paused her walk, phone in hand. A teenager on a bike slowed to a stop across the street. No one said anything, but their presence was a silent witness. Then came the cuffs. "Turn around," he ordered. She hesitated, just for a second. Not out of defiance, but out of disbelief. "Officer, I'm a U.S. Army general. I've served this country for over 30 years. I've led troops in combat zones. I've buried friends. I don't think you want to do this." He didn't respond, just grabbed her wrist and snapped the metal around it. The click echoed louder than it should have. People gasped. Someone whispered, "That's not right." But no one stepped in. They watched as she was walked to the patrol car, her posture still straight, her breathing steady, though her heart pounded like a drum in her chest. This wasn't fear, it was fury wrapped in discipline. The kind of anger that doesn't shout but remembers. As she sat in the back seat, the smell of stale coffee and vinyl filling her nose. She looked out the window at the neighborhood she'd just driven through minutes ago. Peaceful, familiar, safe. Now it felt alien. The officer slammed the door shut, the sound final, like a chapter closing. At the station, things moved fast. She was processed like any other detainee. Fingerprints, photo, belongings logged. No special treatment. No recognition of rank. When she asked to call her aide, the desk sergeant shrugged. "You'll get your call when it's time." She didn't argue. She sat on the hard plastic bench, wrists still cuffed, and let her mind work. She replayed every word, every gesture, every micro-expression from the officer. She knew this wasn't about a broken taillight or a slow stop. It was about who he saw when he looked at her, and who he refused to see. Outside, the video was already spreading. Grainy, shaky, but clear enough. A poised black woman in civilian clothes treated like a threat for doing nothing more than existing while driving. Comments poured in, some angry, some supportive, some skeptical. But the footage didn't lie. It showed respect met with suspicion, calm met with control, and dignity met with handcuffs. Back at the precinct, another officer, a younger one, maybe new to the force, glanced at her file, then at her face, then back at the file. He frowned. "Ma'am, are you really—" Before he could finish, the arresting officer cut in. "Drop it, she's playing a role. Happens all the time, but the seed was planted." Doubt had crept in. Meanwhile, she sat in silence, not out of submission but strategy. She'd been in worse places. Desert outposts, war rooms, hospitals, holding a soldier's hand as they took their last breath. This? This was just another kind of battlefield, and she knew how to fight without throwing a punch. She thought about her soldiers, past and present, how they looked up to her not because of her rank, but because she never asked them to do something she wouldn't do herself. How she'd told them over and over, "Your uniform doesn't protect you from injustice, but your character does." Now, in a county jail holding cell, wearing street clothes and metal bracelets, those words echoed in her mind. She wasn't scared, but she was tired. Tired of having to prove her humanity, her credibility, her worth, over and over, even after earning stars on her shoulders and scars on her soul. Still, she held on to one truth. This wouldn't end here. Not like this, because when they finally let her make that phone call, and they would eventually, she wouldn't call a lawyer first. She'd call someone who could reach the Pentagon in under 60 seconds. And when that call went through, everything would change. But for now, she waited. Quiet. Present. Unbroken. The street outside grew darker. The station buzzed with routine noise. Radios crackling, boots on tile, the hum of fluorescent lights. And in that small room, a woman who had commanded thousands sat alone, not as a victim but as a witness. And witnesses, especially ones with her kind of memory, always have the last word. The holding cell wasn't much. Just 4 gray walls, a metal bench bolted to the floor, and a flickering overhead light that buzzed like an angry insect. It smelled faintly of bleach and old sweat. Outside the night deepened, but inside time moved strangely. Slow in the body, fast in the mind. She sat with her back straight, hands resting on her knees, eyes open but seeing beyond the walls. Not lost in thought, just watching, remembering, planning. She'd been processed like any other suspect. Fingerprinted, photographed, asked the same questions 3 times, as if repetition would crack her story. Each time she answered calmly, clearly, never raising her voice. She didn't argue when they took her phone, her keys, even the small gold pin she always wore, a gift from a unit she'd led through one of the hardest tours overseas. It wasn't about the object. It was about the message. You are no one here. But she knew better. Rank didn't vanish just because someone refused to see it. Honor didn't disappear because metal circled your wrists. And truth didn't shrink just because someone chose to ignore it. A young officer passed by the cell, glanced in, then paused. He looked like he'd just come off training, uniform crisp, eyes wide with that mix of eagerness and uncertainty new recruits often carry. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Ma'am," he said quietly, glancing down the hall to make sure no one was watching. "Are you really a general?" She looked at him, not with anger, not with pity, but with something steadier. "Yes," she said simply. He swallowed. "Your ID looked real." "But Sergeant Briggs, he said it was fake. Said people try that all the time. Do I look like I'm trying anything?" she asked gently. He didn't answer right away. Then almost to himself, "No, you don't." He lingered a moment longer before walking off, but something had shifted. Not much, just a crack in the certainty that had held the whole situation together. And cracks, even small ones, let light in. Back in the cell, she closed her eyes for a few seconds. Not to sleep. Just to center herself. She thought about her soldiers, the ones who'd followed her into chaos and come out changed. She remembered the faces of those who hadn't made it back. She carried them with her always. And now, in this cold room, she felt their presence like a quiet hum in her chest. Stay sharp, stay calm, stay true. Outside, the world kept turning. A neighbor who'd filmed the arrest posted the video online with a simple caption, "Watch how she's treated." Within an hour, it had thousands of views. Comments poured in, some angry, some skeptical, some heartbreakingly familiar. "Happened to my brother. This is why I don't drive at night." She didn't even move wrong. The footage showed everything. Her hands on the wheel, her calm voice, the officer's rising tension for no clear reason. No shouting. No resistance. Just a woman being treated like a threat for existing while black. At the station, whispers started. Not loud but persistent. A dispatcher asked another officer if they'd run her ID through military channels. Briggs said not to bother, came the reply. But someone did it anyway, quietly, off record. And when the confirmation came back, verified, active duty, 2-star rank, the air in the back office grew thick with unease. Still, no one came to release her. No apology. No explanation. Just silence. She used that silence. She replayed every second of the stop. The officer's tone, his body language, the exact words he used. She noted the timestamps in her mind, the names on badges, the sequence of events. This wasn't paranoia. It was preparation. She'd been trained to observe, to remember, to act only when the moment was right. Hours passed. The night shift changed over. New faces came in, some curious, some indifferent. One officer brought her a cup of water without being asked. He didn't speak, just placed it on the bench and walked away. Small kindnesses like that mattered. They reminded her that not everyone wore blinders. Then around 11 p.m., the desk sergeant finally appeared at the cell door. "You can make your call now." She stood slowly, joints stiff from sitting too long, but her movements were smooth, controlled. She didn't rub her wrists where the cuffs had left faint red marks. She just walked to the phone on the wall, picked up the receiver and dialed a number she knew by heart. It rang twice. "Secure line," a voice answered. "It's me," she said. A pause. Then instantly, "Ma'am, are you all right? I'm in county lockup. Wrongfully detained. No charges. No cause, just bias." The voice on the other end didn't hesitate. "Location?" She gave it. Then added, "And get someone on the phone with the sheriff's office now." Already on it. She hung up. No drama, no shouting, just facts. Delivered with the quiet authority of someone who knew her words would move mountains. Back in the cell, she sat again, but this time, it felt different. The waiting wasn't passive anymore. It was strategic. She knew what came next. Protocols would activate, chains of command would engage, and within minutes, people far above this precinct would be asking hard questions. But she didn't gloat. Didn't smile. She just sat, steady as a stone in a river. Meanwhile, in a quiet office at the Pentagon, a duty officer scrambled. Calls were made. Emails fired off. Within 10 minutes, the local sheriff's office received a direct inquiry from the Department of Defense. Not a request. An inquiry. Polite but urgent. "Is a U.S. Army general currently in your custody?" The sheriff, half asleep at home, was jolted awake by the call. He called the precinct himself. "Who's holding a general?" Confusion. Denial. Then panic. Back at the station, the mood shifted fast. Officers exchanged glances. Sergeant Briggs, the arresting officer, was pulled into a side room. His face went pale when he heard the words Pentagon and 2-star. The young officer who'd asked her about her rank earlier now stood near the holding area, watching. He saw the change in the air, the sudden urgency, the hushed voices, the way everyone moved like they'd just realized they were standing on thin ice. And then, footsteps. Fast, purposeful. The desk sergeant returned, this time with keys. "Ma'am," he said, voice lower now, almost apologetic. "We're releasing you immediately." She didn't stand right away. She looked at him. "On what grounds?" Lack of probable cause," he mumbled. She nodded slowly, then rose. "Good, because there never was any." They returned her belongings, phone, keys, the small gold pin. Someone had even wiped the dust off it. She clipped it back on without comment. As she walked out of the cell, past the booking desk, past the officers who wouldn't meet her eyes, she didn't look back. But she remembered every face, every silence, every moment someone chose to look away. Outside, the night air was cooler now. Crickets sang. A street lamp cast a soft glow on the pavement. It was the same world as before, but she wasn't the same person who'd entered that station. Something had been confirmed tonight. That respect must sometimes be demanded, not assumed. That dignity, even when stripped away, can't truly be taken. She got into her SUV, still parked where she'd left it, now surrounded by curious onlookers and a few news vans that had arrived after the video went viral. She didn't speak to the cameras. Just started the engine, adjusted the mirror, and drove off. But as she merged onto the main road, she knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. because what happened tonight wasn't just about her. It was about every person who'd been doubted, disrespected, or detained for no reason other than how they looked. And if her rank could open doors that others couldn't reach, then she had a duty to walk through them, not just for herself, but for everyone still waiting in the dark. She drove home under a sky full of stars, her hands steady on the wheel, her mind already turning toward what came next. The call lasted less than 90 seconds, but in that short stretch of time, entire systems shifted. It wasn't loud. There were no shouting matches or dramatic threats. Just a calm voice on one end and on the other, a chain of urgent actions already unfolding before the receiver was even set back in its cradle. Within minutes, a duty officer at the Pentagon reached out to the local sheriff's department, not through regular channels, but through a direct line reserved for matters involving high-ranking personnel. The message was clear. A 2-star U.S. Army general had been wrongfully detained without cause, and her release was not a request, it was expected immediately. At the same time, a senior aide began contacting military police and legal advisors, not to escalate but to document. Every second mattered now, not for revenge but for accountability. Because if this could happen to someone with stars on her shoulders, how many others had faced the same treatment without a single witness or a way to prove it? Back at the precinct, confusion turned to quiet panic. The officer who'd made the arrest paced near the break room, his face tight, his usual swagger gone. He kept muttering, "I didn't know. I thought she was lying," as if disbelief excused disrespect. But the truth was already spreading faster than his excuses could catch up. The sheriff arrived within 20 minutes, still buttoning his coat, eyes sharp with concern. He didn't yell. He didn't blame. He simply asked for the body cam footage, the arrest report, and a full account of what had happened. When he saw the video, her hands visible, her voice steady, his own officer escalating for no clear reason, he exhaled slowly, like a man who just realized he was standing in a room filling with water. Meanwhile, she was already home. Not in a rush, not in tears, but with the quiet focus of someone who knew the real work was just beginning. She made a cup of tea, sat at her kitchen table, and opened her laptop. She typed a short factual email to her command. Time of stop, officer's badge number, sequence of events, names of witnesses. No emotion. Just evidence. But she didn't stop there. She called a friend, a retired judge who now worked with civil rights organizations. They spoke for nearly an hour. Not about suing, not about headlines, but about how to turn this moment into something that could protect others. "This isn't just about me," she said. "It's about the next person who gets pulled over for breathing while black, who doesn't have a Pentagon number to call." By dawn, the story had exploded online. The video had been shared by veterans groups, legal advocates, and even a few law enforcement leaders who called the arrest unacceptable. News outlets picked it up, not with sensational headlines, but with careful reporting that highlighted the lack of probable cause and the general's composure throughout. One anchor put it plainly: she didn't resist. She didn't argue. She just existed, and that was enough to get her cuffed. At the sheriff's office, a press statement was drafted. It acknowledged the incident, confirmed her identity, and announced an internal investigation. No defensiveness. No both sides. Just facts, and a promise to review policies. But the real turning point came mid-morning. A high-ranking official from the Department of Defense called the sheriff directly. Not to scold, but to collaborate. "We need to understand how this happened," the official said, "so it never happens again to anyone." They agreed to share training resources, review protocols for identifying military personnel, and explore joint workshops on implicit bias. That same day, the arresting officer was placed on administrative leave, not fired because due process mattered, but removed from duty while the investigation ran its course. It wasn't punishment yet, it was responsibility. Back in her home, she received a call from a young soldier she'd mentored years ago, now stationed overseas. "Ma'am," the voice said, shaky with emotion, "I saw the video. I needed to hear your voice." She listened, offered quiet reassurance, then said something that would later be quoted in a military newsletter. "They can question my story, but they can't erase my service. And they sure can't silence the truth." By afternoon, a local community group reached out asking if she'd be willing to speak at a town hall. She agreed, but only if it included law enforcement, residents, and youth leaders. She didn't want a rally. She wanted a conversation. That evening, as she prepared her notes, she thought about the officer who'd arrested her. She didn't hate him. Anger like that was a luxury she couldn't afford. But she did feel sorrow. For him. For the system that let bias go unchecked. For all the people who'd been treated like suspects just because of their skin. Her goal wasn't to destroy him. It was to make sure no one else had to live through what she did. And that started with one phone call, but it wouldn't end there. Because now people were listening. Not because she shouted, but because she stood firm. Not because she demanded special treatment, but because she asked for basic respect and was denied it. The next morning, she put on her uniform for the first time since returning home. Not for ceremony, not for show, but because it was time to step back into her role, not just as a leader in the military, but as a voice for those who didn't have one. She walked out her front door, sunlight on her shoulders, stars on her collar and purpose in her step. The call to the Pentagon had opened the door. Now she intended to walk through it and hold it open for everyone behind her. The days that followed weren't filled with courtroom drama or angry press conferences. Instead, they moved with the quiet intensity of a storm that had passed but left the ground soaked and ready for change. The general didn't vanish into silence, and she didn't lash out in fury. She chose a third path, clarity. She agreed to speak, but only on her terms. No sensational interviews. No shouting matches on cable news. Just honest conversations, first with military leadership, then with local officials, and finally with the public. Her message was simple. What happened to me isn't rare. It's just rarely caught on video. The body cam footage was released by the sheriff's department within a week. Not because they had to, but because they knew hiding it would only deepen the wound. The video showed exactly what people had seen in the bystander clip, but with more detail. Her calm answers, the officer's growing impatience, the moment he dismissed her military ID like it was a toy. There was no violence, no resistance, just a slow, steady erosion of dignity. Viewers didn't need commentary to understand what they were seeing. You could feel it in your chest. The internal affairs investigation moved faster than most. Within 10 days, a preliminary report confirmed what many already suspected. The stop had no legal basis, the arrest was unjustified, and the officer's actions showed signs of racial bias. Not overt slurs or hate symbols, just the kind of assumptions that live in glances, tones, and split-second decisions. The kind that say, "You don't belong here," without ever saying it out loud. The officer remained on leave. His union representative issued a statement saying he was cooperating fully and deeply regretful of the misunderstanding. But the general didn't focus on him. She knew that one person's mistake was a symptom, not the disease. Instead, she turned her attention to systems. She met with the sheriff, not in a conference room full of lawyers, but over coffee in his office. They talked for 2 hours. About training, about community trust, about how even well-meaning officers can carry blind spots. She didn't come as an accuser. She came as a partner. "I've led teams in war zones," she told him. "If I can teach soldiers to see each other as human under fire, we can teach officers to do the same on city streets." That meeting led to something unexpected, a joint proposal. The sheriff's department would work with the Department of Defense to create a new protocol for identifying active-duty military personnel during traffic stops. A digital verification system, clear guidelines, training modules, and, most importantly, mandatory sessions on implicit bias, not as a punishment but as part of ongoing professional development. Veterans groups praised the move. Civil rights organizations called it a model for accountability. Even some police unions, usually resistant to outside input, acknowledged that something needed to shift. But the real test came when she agreed to speak at a community town hall. The gymnasium of the local high school was packed, not just with activists or reporters, but with neighbors, retirees, teenagers, and a handful of uniformed officers sitting quietly in the back. No one shouted. No one held signs. They just wanted to hear her speak. She walked to the mic in civilian clothes. No uniform, no medals. Just a woman who'd lived through something and chose to share it. "I'm not here because I want pity," she began. "I'm here because I want prevention." She described the stop not with anger but with precision. She talked about the weight of the handcuffs, the silence of the bystanders, the way her years of service meant nothing in that moment to the man holding the keys. Then she paused. "But here's what matters more," she said. "This wasn't about me alone. It was about every person who's been told you don't look like you belong here. Every veteran pulled over and treated like a suspect. Every parent who teaches their child how to move during a traffic stop, not because they've done something wrong, but because they might be seen as dangerous just for existing." A woman in the front row wiped her eyes. A young man nodded slowly. She didn't call for the officer to be fired. She didn't demand revenge. Instead, she asked for something harder. Change. "Punishment ends a story," she said. "Prevention rewrites it." Afterward, people lined up to speak with her, not for autographs, but for connection. A black teenager asked how she stayed calm. An older white man, a retired cop himself, apologized on behalf of his profession. A mother whispered, "Thank you for saying what so many of us feel but can't prove." Later that night, she sat on her porch listening to crickets and distant traffic. Her phone buzzed. A message from a national advocacy group asking if she'd help design a nationwide training program for law enforcement agencies working near military bases. She typed back, "Yes, but only if it includes community voices." She knew this moment wouldn't fix everything. Bias didn't vanish because one video went viral. Trust wasn't rebuilt in a single speech, but seeds had been planted. Conversations had started, and policies were shifting, not because of outrage alone, but because someone chose to respond with truth, not trauma. Back at the precinct, the young officer who'd once asked her if she was really a general now volunteered to help develop the new training module. He said he wanted to do better. She met with him briefly, didn't scold, just said, "Then listen more than you speak." Meanwhile, the arresting officer remained on leave. Rumors swirled. Would he be fired? Reassigned? Charged? But the general refused to speculate. "Let the process work," she told a reporter who asked. "Justice isn't fast, but it has to be fair." And fairness, she knew, wasn't just about punishment. It was about learning, about growing, about making sure the next person didn't have to endure what she did. As the weeks passed, the story didn't fade. It evolved. Schools invited her to speak to students about leadership and integrity. Police academies requested her input on de-escalation training. Even the Pentagon launched a review of how military personnel are treated during civilian encounters. She never sought the spotlight. But now that it was on her, she used it like a flashlight, not to blind but to reveal what had been hidden in the dark. And in doing so, she reminded everyone watching that real strength isn't in rank or power. It's in the choice to turn pain into purpose, quietly, firmly, and without losing your humanity along the way. Months passed and the headlines faded. The video stopped trending. The late-night talk shows moved on to other stories. But for the woman at the center of it all, the work had only just begun. She didn't disappear after the cameras left. If anything, she became more visible, not as a symbol but as a builder. She turned down book deals that wanted to frame her story as a battle between good and evil. She declined interviews that pushed for drama over depth. Instead, she quietly partnered with a coalition of community leaders, retired law enforcement officers and military veterans to create something practical, a training program called Common Ground. It wasn't about blame. It was about bridges. The program rolled out first in the county where she'd been arrested. Officers spent half a day in workshops that mixed real stories with role-playing scenarios. They practiced identifying military IDs, yes, but more importantly, they practiced listening. They learned how assumptions can cloud judgment, how tone can escalate tension, and how a moment of humility can diffuse a situation before it spirals. Veterans shared what it felt like to serve their country overseas, only to be treated like a threat back home. Teens spoke about the scripts their parents gave them for traffic stops. Keep your hands at 10 and 2. Say sir even if you're scared. Don't reach for your license too fast. The room was often quiet after those stories, not out of guilt but out of understanding. She didn't run the sessions herself. She sat in the back observing, taking notes. Occasionally she'd speak, but only when asked. Her presence alone carried weight. Officers who once might have dismissed bias training as political theater now leaned in when she walked in the room. Not because she demanded respect, but because she'd earned it. Through service, through silence, through strength. One afternoon, during a break in a training session, the young officer who'd once quietly questioned her rank approached her. He'd been promoted to field trainer. "I used your stop, the real one, not the video, as a case study," he said. "We walked through it step by step. Not to shame anyone, but to ask, where did it go wrong? And how do we fix it before it happens again?" She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "That's the point," she said. "Not to punish the past, to protect the future." Her influence spread beyond local departments. The Department of Defense adopted key parts of common ground for bases nationwide. Military police and civilian law enforcement began joint drills, not just for emergencies, but for everyday interactions. Even the FBI invited her to consult on community engagement strategies. She always said yes, but only if the community had a seat at the table. Still, she never lost touch with the human side of it all. She made time to visit high schools, not to lecture, but to listen. In one classroom, a student asked, "Did you ever think about quitting after what happened?" She smiled faintly. Quitting wouldn't have changed anything. Staying and speaking up, that's what matters. She also kept in touch with the neighbors who'd witnessed her arrest. The woman who filmed it became a local advocate for body cam transparency. The teenager on the bike started a youth group focused on civic trust. Small ripples, but real ones. The officer who arrested her was eventually reassigned to administrative duties after an internal review. He wasn't fired, due process held, but he was required to complete the full common ground training and undergo counseling. He never publicly apologized, but months later, through a mutual contact, a handwritten note reached her. It didn't excuse what happened. It simply said, "I see it now. Thank you for not giving up on people like me." She tucked the note into a drawer. Not as proof of victory, but as a reminder that change is possible, even in the hardest hearts. As the year turned, she received an invitation to speak at a national leadership summit. This time she accepted, not to retell her story, but to share what came after. "Rank didn't save me," she told the audience of educators, officers, and policymakers. "Truth and accountability did. And those aren't privileges, they're responsibilities we all share." After the speech, a woman approached her in tears. "My son's in the Army," she said. "He's coming home next month. I've been so scared for him. But hearing you gives me hope." That, more than any medal or title, was the reward. She never sought fame. But in choosing to respond with grace instead of rage, she became something rare. A leader who turned a moment of injustice into a movement of integrity. Not through grand gestures, but through steady, daily choices to show up, to speak clearly, to listen deeply. Back home, life returned to a kind of normal, but it was a new normal, shaped by what she'd lived through. She still drove the same SUV, still paused at crosswalks, still wore her gold pin. But now, when she passed a patrol car, she didn't tense. She held her head high, not in defiance, but in quiet confidence that things could be better, and that she had a role to play in making them so. Years later, when new recruits went through common ground training, they'd watch the original video, not as a cautionary tale, but as a starting point. Instructors would ask, "What would you have done differently?" And the answers, more often than not, reflected not just policy, but humanity. She never called herself a hero. She'd say she was just doing what any leader should do: protect the people, even when the system fails them. And in the end, that's what made her story stick. Not the arrest, not the call to the Pentagon, but the choice to use her voice not for herself, but for everyone still waiting to be seen, heard, and treated like they belong.